Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with my air drumming co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, how are the hi-hats sounding?
Oh man, really crisp.
Yes, that's good. Well, hopefully we will be just as crisp as your air hi-hats as we get into this week's episode. We need to have our Mike Shea sports moment. So, what did you
Indeed.
learn today about gaming from sports?
So I was watching the World Cup this last weekend, and there was a discussion about how England had kind of, over the last several World Cups, has sort of gotten better and better at functioning as a team despite all these intense rivalries when you bring everybody from the country together to play as a World Cup team. And they said that this year, what's been particularly effective and really helped them was the fact that they play Werewolf as a way to come together and break down barriers. And I thought that was pretty awesome.
Awesome. Awesome. So, gaming, it's all over. It's even
It's
in
everywhere.
in sports. Yeah.
Hmm.
So with no further ado, let's get into our Tootbag Patreon missive section. This week we have one new question and one old question that we failed to answer last time. So first, the new question. This is from Southern Wilds on Twitter. How regularly do D&D designers play the game? I would assume it is greater than the average 5e player. Do you think that could have a negative impact on the design of 1D&D? Lots of players I know aren't anywhere near exhausting 5e. And I think these are all good questions, although they may not be as interrelated as one might think. So first of all, I think D&D designers, if we're talking about Wizards of the Coast employees, do play quite regularly.
Hmm.
While I haven't talked to the designers recently, I know that designers in the past have talked about playing lunchtime games or after work games. And this is above and beyond like playtesting. So they have a regular game at the office, and they often will have a regular game, a home game, and then will play at work as they can with playtesting.
Yeah.
So how often do they do it? Probably at least as much as the average player and maybe more. What do you think?
Yes, but so
Mhm.
I think that's true. I think that there have been. I'm pretty sure that there have been some years where, and especially I'd say around parts of third edition, where what I heard was that people there were not really familiar with the rules they'd written, and that happens to some extent normally, right? You can't know everything. No person knows all rules, no matter what part of it you've written. But really, sort of a lack of kind of understanding of how the world plays your game
Mhm.
was not an unfair characterization. And to the point where during the fourth edition days, they sort of began to see that this problem existed, I think, as they interacted with fans and said, let's change this up. Let's play the games more often. Let's make sure we play both our game and other people's games so we know what's going on. And that became more of a culture. I don't know what it looks like today. Um,
Mhm.
I think and I worry that some of the games are played in ways that may not resemble what the average game is like. To
Right.
which you'd say, how do you even know what the average game looks like? And I don't know. You'd have to run around playing with people that aren't your
Right.
friends, right? And they don't have the time for that. Um, there's also this question of just D&D designers in general. How often can you play? Can I, right?
Mhm.
Um, there was a time when we were writing that Ink book, there was a time when I almost canceled my home game
Mhm.
because I was just really against the wall time wise. But I thought to myself, no, I think I really need this. And in fact, I did. It invigorated all of my writing and allowed me to playtest various of the downtime rules and things like that. And so it ended up being really
Right.
critical, but I almost canceled it due to lack of time. And I think that's a real issue for a lot of designers. I think there are a lot of designers out there who aren't reading the latest books, aren't playing constantly.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I am technically a D&D designer full time, and I have a once every other week home game where we play 5e D&D. I will take part in play tests occasionally, maybe once a month, where I'll
Mhm.
get online, especially, and test something. I'm signed up to play a non D&D play test game tomorrow night, So, as often as I possibly can, with the understanding that I also have a life outside of
Yeah,
D&D.
right.
But I cannot overestimate. It is very important
Hmm.
if you are a game designer to play with different people, play different games. Don't just get stuck in that rut of playing your
Yeah.
home game. As Teos said, you know, during third edition, the only reason I am where I am in my career is I was part of the Role Playing Game Association, the RPGA, which is now called the Adventurers League. And I ran hundreds, if not thousands, of game for thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. And I learned that there is no average D&D player or average D&D game, because it is such a unique game.
Yeah.
And in that time that Teos is talking about, I would sit at tables where Wizards of the Coast game designers were running games, and we would do things and they would say, you can't do that. That's not what the rules say. And we would pull out our player's handbook and say, show us where that says that in these rules that you wrote. And they couldn't. And
Yeah.
so therefore they were learning
At
uh,
the table.
at the table via, this was their play test, right?
Yeah.
After the fact, unfortunately, but this was their play test. So it's very important to do that. Now, will playing a lot have a negative impact on the design of the game? I think no. I think the opposite. I think the more you play, the more you learn,
Hmm.
not only about the
Yeah.
game itself, the text of it and the mechanics of it, but of your consumer base, your customer base, your fan base, and what they want and how they use this thing you're creating. Would
Yeah.
you agree?
Absolutely. The more you play, the better. You can't play too much. And the more that you play different types of games with your game, the better you will be positioned to understand how to do things, right?
Yeah. So the statement that followed the question, do you think that could have a negative impact on the design of 1D&D, was lots of players I know aren't anywhere near exhausting 5e. And that seems to me to make the correlation between playing a lot and
Mm.
therefore wanting a new edition of the game. I don't think that is a causal statement. I don't think the designers say, "Oh, we've played so much 5e that we're sick of it, so we want to make a new
No.
game."
Yeah.
The decision to make a new game, make a new edition, make a product is generally far, far, far above the pay grade of the people who are designing the game.
Right. Right. And
And as we, yeah,
I think designers sort of train themselves when they have that kind of a job to you're just in a creation mode and you're not
mhm,
really thinking, does the world need another subclass? Because someone's saying 4 subclasses come in this book, and so you work on that and you do that. Um, where I will say that maybe there could be this kind of an effect is that when you maybe are, in your silo doing your work, you may think of the game from an expertise perspective, right? Expert player rather than new player. And so what you may
mhm,
forget is what it's like to be a new player picking up your game and the many ways that can happen, right? And a trick I like doing to my brain is whenever I walk into a gaming store, which is often, I go to the D&D or just the general role-playing game shelves, and I imagine I know nothing.
mhm,
What does that look like, right? And sometimes it can be really interesting, right? Because one of the most colorful books could be a 4th edition book, you
mhm,
know. So if you're just going in there like, I want to try this D&D thing, what do you pick up, right? Is the starter set an obvious intro? Is the player's handbook
mhm.
the obvious core book? Those kinds of questions I think are really fascinating. Or does Tasha's look like the first book you should buy, right? And what does that
Right.
mean? Those kinds of questions are really good to ask, and it's we have to hit ourselves over the head to remind ourselves to do that, I think.
Right. It to just put a final stake in this, what Deus is talking about. If you want to pick up sewing and you go to a crafting store, you could probably find among all of the yarn and the needles and everything a how to knit book,
Yeah.
right? Knitting for dummies, and that's great. Uh, does that exist in these gaming stores? That's why those initial box sets are so important, especially if you walk into a Target or a Walmart or one of those sorts of stores where the only thing they're going to have is that. And that's what Wizards of the Coast wants, right? They want people buying those box sets. A more specialized gaming store might just assume that their customers are doing that. And that's why Wizards will want to incentivize stores to have special areas for new players or be on call to answer the question for people that walk in. Whereas a lot of gaming stores I'm familiar with don't do that. They just want to sell whatever, magic cards that are going to make them the most money. And they don't give that sort of help as often as maybe they could or should.
Right. And do their staff even know, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's a fun thing where you can do it for any game, right? Like I'll walk in for my in the Sun for my son I've done in the past where I go into a gaming store and I see a bunch of booster packs of some collectible card game, and I say which ones should I get, and they may totally know or they may not know, right? But it's just noise. I'm just seeing a row of noise. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk about this more Southern Wilds when we talk about the news, where we had a fireside chat from the Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast presidents. But the question that we didn't get to last week was from Bram Baker. It was a question about different schools of spells and what that means. So Bram asked, with the new playtest material, spell schools seem to become more important. Are spell schools a boon to one D&D or an artifact that needs to be replaced with divine, primal, and arcane? So I haven't studied the one D&D playtest packet as much as some have. So I haven't noticed that the schools are more or less important than they previously have been, but they've always been sort of important for game mechanical reasons. So spell lists, I don't think are going to replace spell schools because the schools are a tool that you can use in game design. So a wizard subclass might be evoker or illusionist or enchanter, and then they can use those spell schools to power their abilities. An ancestry might have species might have a advantage on saving throws against illusions. So you need illusions in order to do that. So these spell schools complicate the game, but hopefully they don't overcomplicate the game and they become a useful tool. So that's why you still see those schools there. And that's why I don't think you're going to have them go away.
I had a similar thought at one point reading over something, and I remember thinking like, well, maybe we don't need to know whether it's necromancy or conjuration, and then I realized no, it really does. It plays this role, right? There are those times when you want to be able to say these types of spells, right? I get a bonus, or I don't worry about them, or whatever. Right? I'm immune to enchantment, whatever. So it is useful to put them into these kinds of silos. Also, they tend to live sort of in the background and I don't think cause too much trouble. Probably the biggest trouble is just dispel or detect magic, where the player will say what school, and it's a fun DM test as to whether you can remember what all the schools are and how to describe them. Right? It's worth a little cheat sheet if you're like me and forget things like this. The other question to this is these spell lists, right? And what 1D&D does that's really fascinating is it takes away the idea of having a wizard spell list or a cleric spell list in the player's handbook, and instead says divine or arcane or primal. And that is, on one hand, great because, this list can be smaller, but it's not great because you then have to create caveats. And that's what we see in the 1D&D pack is, right? It'll say you get divine, or really the bard was probably the best one, where it would say, arcane, but also you get these spells, right? Because they have to throw some healing back in or give it a healing feature to make up for that. And that's where it shows its sort of shaky standing. I think what they want to be able to do in the future is to say, here's a new divine spell, and then we all know it goes onto the list. But it's still crud. I don't personally like it. I find it's a little too ill-fitting, and I think it'll create more work and confusion than bring us benefits. So
right. I mean, this is one of the main cruxes of game design is, you want to simplify, but you
yeah,
don't want to oversimplify. And if you do simplify later, you can't dig into these things that you've created to make an elegant solution to something down the line. So I always say to myself, let's see if we can simplify this mechanic. Let's see if we can simplify this. But sometimes I end up simplifying myself out of something that could be much cooler and even easier to use than something else that I end up having to create to fill in the void that I left behind by
yeah.
simplifying.
I
So
think that's what we've seen. There've been just enough tweaks to try to like make it fit that I go, I don't think this is a good tool. But we'll see.
right. And if you oversimplify and then have to make 10,000 exceptions to your rules, it ends up defeating the original purpose. So great question, Bram. Thank you for asking. Now we will head into our news and commentary section where we have some fun things to discuss. First, let's talk about Wizards hiring a new D&D creative lead. This is actually called the head of creative for Dungeons and Dragons, who will lead the franchise with the goal of growing an audience and revenue worldwide. The role manages the game design, world building, and content team for the core IP, as well as managing and guiding relationships with teams creating digital expressions of the game. And that was just the first paragraph of this help wanted sort of ad. And the first thing I thought, Teos, was, oh, this would be so cool. And boy, do I not want this job.
That's what most of my friends said. And I had the opposite feeling where I looked at this list and I'm looking at it now and I went, oh, this would be fun, which I think shows where I am in my day job career, where these are the kinds of sort of tasks that I sometimes have. But it's hard, and we've seen this job be hard over the years, right? I mean, Mike Merles, I guess, had it, before that, Bill Slavicsek. Nathan Stewart played the role for a while, though maybe not as closely as these tasks are assigned. And he sort of became a VP from his role that he was playing. Ray Winninger was let go. He played this role probably closer than most people in terms of what these activities are. And so now they want to bring in someone new. It's not a VP position. It's always interesting with, titles matter to a lot of people. What is head of creative? It's not a executive position. It's something below that. And it has a lot of tasks that are big deal, that are actually fairly executive sounding in terms of what's there. But also some lower kind of level managerial levels. But you're certainly not supposed to, as in some previous versions of TSR and Wizards, where the job was also designing, right? This is leading, this is monitoring, this is making sure that the executives are getting what they need out of the team and that the team's getting what it needs out of itself. It's vital. So whoever takes this, I mean, it couldn't be a more important. It's probably the most important job that Wizards could have the right person for, right? And a fascinating challenge for whoever takes this on.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those positions where, there are certain personality types that work well for different jobs, and you can have a totally type A plus person working on the rules, and they're right down there in the mechanics, and they're making sure everything ticks with clockwork precision. And then you have sort of more personality, having to work well with others and take advice and be able to give bad news to people or stand up for something that is right against people who may not understand what's best for the game. And this is like all of the above. This is one of those people where you need to know what's going on the creative side, not just on like world building, but also on the actual game design and game mechanics, but also turn around and be able to, explain this not only to the executives at your company, but maybe with partners who are going to be using the game in a certain way.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to what I do now without the high stakes of having, right, 2, 10, 100 million fans ready to yell at you when things go wrong. So it's
Well, I
yeah,
think it's a
I wish
position that,
someone well.
yeah, I wish someone will too. It's a position that I think you have to forget about the fans. Like I remember when Mike Merles was named, people were saying things like, one of us, and because he started with RPGA and third party design and things like that, and I think he wanted to sort of still be connected to the fans in many ways, but I think it at that point you have to step away, right? And even these days with think the toxicity on Twitter, and any designer has to do that, right? You have to step away. You can't be the person you were before. But in this case especially, you have to focus on the creative team and
Mhm.
and how they intersect with all the other departments, and whether that's healthy, right? Is the team healthy? Are the connection points healthy? Is
Mhm.
everything aligned? And then
Yeah.
they want you to measure that, right? So you've got to be able to measure all of those performance indicators to see how the game is progressing for a brand that is nowhere close to $1 billion, but they want to be $1 billion.
Right.
And that's a touchy, an important point for us fans, because we want someone who will protect that team
Mhm.
and take care of them to make sure that they continue to be relevant and important, right? There's that whole like comic book thing where the movies can overshadow the comic books, but you still want and need great comic books with great ideas and happy people working on them. Can you do that, right, over time?
Mhm.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, and that transitions very nicely into our next bit of news, which is Hasbro president Chris Cox's fireside chat.
Yeah.
So we need to thank Dave Rosser, who is DAR Jr. on the socials, for not only keeping the community informed about these things, but for being such a positive voice in the community. And it's his reporting on EN World that helped us find this information.
And from my end, I want to thank Scipio, who often helps break down financial disclosure type information like this. Also provided us with a breakdown and written transcript, which is great.
Okay. So, what did this fireside chat entail? So, probably the reason that this happened is because Bank of America, as we reported a few weeks ago, downgraded Hasbro stock based on an investment firm claiming that Wizards of the Coast was eroding Magic the Gathering's long-term card values, and therefore people would stop buying them, and so on and so on.
Well,
So
let's just
Hasbro was downgraded.
let's touch on that quickly, because the idea is you're printing so many cards that collectors give up, right?
Right.
And they start thinking, well, there's no value in this. I can't, if I have an ancient Black Lotus and you're just going to reprint a version of it, even if it's not the same, you've eroded my value, and so I can't um, count on what I have, on what I'm paying for, right? And the answer in this fireside chat was sort of, we don't care about the secondary market,
Right.
and we print to demand. So as long as people, we are going to print the number of cards that people buy, and if people aren't buying them, we print less. Um, that was a fascinating answer for the Magic
Mhm.
side, and made me wonder, and how does that translate to the D&D side as well?
Yeah. And I mean, that was my second thought. My first thought was, "That's too bad that they got downgraded." And my second thought was, yeah, I mean, is it really going to cut into demand that they are printing more? And we have seen cases where printing more does hurt a brand. We only need to look as far as TSR.
Yeah.
So that makes us then wonder, is it going to be a problem with D&D?
Hmm.
And that's what the fireside chat then turned to was, well, look, Magic is our first $1 billion brand. Now let's talk about D&D. And so much interesting information here. We could have a whole show just talking about what this fireside chat mentioned.
Yeah.
What were some of the highlights for you, Teos?
So we've heard now a couple of iterations of this talk that Cynthia Williams gave, where she said DMs are 20% of the audience, but they're 90% of our sales. And we want to change that. And that's been said. It's fine to say it a few times, but it's now been said a number of times. And in this case, and during this fireside chat, was said in and we are doing things about this, right? And not only we're noting this, but this is our when you say what are we doing, this is our focus. That the digital arena enables you to change that, and as they said, monetize D&D. Williams said that the D&D is under monetized, and that all sounds very capitalist and horrible. And I'm not a capitalist, so I agree with those sentiments. At the same time, the rules of the game are, this fireside chat is not for you and I. It's for investors. And you're trying to get people to spend lots of money on your stock. And you have people who have large amounts of shares, as we saw with the whole AltaFax business we reported on earlier. You have to keep those people happy, right? So saying things, it's under monetized, as great growth potential, whatever, like some of that is just the language of the game of stockholder type fireside chats, that you have to say these things. It doesn't mean that that's the only brain that's on, right? Aside Wizards. So it's important to note that, right? It doesn't mean that Chris Perkins is out there going, how will I monetize, right? This is the language that is used in this context. But what it does say is they really believe D&D Beyond was a pivotal purchase that allows you to increase the amount that you can sell to non-DMs. And of course, the huge question is, well, how will they do that? What are they going to offer? And that was not said, right? But that is their game. How does D&D become a billion-dollar brand? The closest answer we have is you pivot off of D&D Beyond to offer things to players and get that other 80% of your play base to spend big money.
Right.
What will you offer? Will it work? We don't know.
Yeah. And the other part of this monetization is they are not talking specifically about the game. They are talking about the brand, because immediately after they say that, they bring up Lord of the Rings and they bring up Game of Thrones, and they say, look at these $6 billion brands. How come D&D can't do that? And it's not because Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings has a role-playing game. It's because they have other avenues that are more revenue generation than a role-playing game is.
Yeah.
They can license out this to video games, which Wizards is heavily going to do. They do it via movies, which D&D is now going to do. They do it via streaming services, which now D&D and Magic the Gathering supposedly is going to do. So I don't panic. Normally, being not a capitalist as Teos, but understanding that you have to be able to work within a capitalist society in order to make things that you want to make. I recognize when I see D&D needs to be more monetized, I freak out for a moment and duck and cover. And then I pull back and say, all right, let's see what this could possibly mean. And I also, working for a company that makes role-playing games, I definitely do understand that D&D has come from a history of hours and hours and hours of fun, spending very little money.
Yeah, that's a problem. It's not good for any of us, right? I mean, it sounds great, but it really isn't, because you have people who say, my favorite thing in the world is D&D. Cool. How does your spending on that compare to all these things that you like less? Oh yeah, I don't spend anything for D&D. That's a problem, right? Because we need you to support it. We need you to be part of the, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we don't need you to, but it's nice that if you do want this hobby to continue, we all recognize the fact that we need to support the people who make it. And so that's why I would love to see more money spent on the game, more investment in the game itself. But we also have to recognize that a lot of the revenue that Wizards of the Coast is looking to make is outside of the game itself. Now, digital not only gives them the opportunity to do that, it also gives them better numbers. When I see that 20% of the audience are DMs, but 90% of sales go to DMs, my first question is, how do you know that? How do you know who's buying books off Amazon? How do you know who's going into Barnes and Noble and purchasing the Player's Handbook, the DMG, and the Monster Manual off the shelf? Do you know their DMs? How? Do you know their players? How? Digitizing gives you that ability to know, all right, I've asked this person in a survey what they do. I can see what they purchase. I can see via my virtual tabletop that they are running a campaign as opposed to being a player in a campaign. Then you can get more more trustworthy numbers.
And that, well, yes and no. That worries me because it's interesting looking, for example, Dragonlance came out this last week. The sales on it are not at the level one would expect for a recent release. So it's like, I don't know, 560 or something on Amazon. And so one of the things people said is, well, you have these direct sales now, right? Through D&D Beyond, you can deal these bundle purchases. To which I go, yeah, but generally the people invested in things online aren't the majority of your customer base. So I don't know that I believe it, but maybe. And so it becomes confusing, right? But that's where you don't know enough, right? And it becomes impossible to create a proper prediction, understanding of the situation when you don't have, when you assume that one data set you're looking at, because it's a great data set, is the data set, right?
Right.
It is a data set.
Sure.
You know, so we create, like, here they talk about, we're going to offer, this is a quote, offer a lot more options to create rewarding experiences post-sale that help us unlock the type of recurring spending you see in digital games, and more than 70% of the revenue in digital gaming essentially is post-sale. So that, that idea that, okay, you bought a book, now we're offering you other things on D&D Beyond. So maybe that's perfectly compatible, but we don't know. We don't know if it impacts what you buy at your local gaming store down or up, right? You don't know if you're robbing from one to fuel the other. It's really hard, and all you're looking at is that data set, and it's dangerous if you think, well, the data set is the truth. It's a data set, it's part of it.
Yeah. Another interesting quote was, the speed of digital means that we are able to expand from what is essentially a yearly book publishing model to our current spending environment, and we're offering content that we know fans want. So we're super excited about the type of opportunities we have with D&D to expand beyond the tabletop to read highly engaged multi-generational fans, all to reach highly engaged multi-generational fans all around the globe. So we often have this discussion about digital versus conventional publishing, as my friend Dale Kingsmill would say, legacy media. And what does the game gain and what does the game lose? Not the brand, not the profits. What does the game gain or lose by having this more emphasis on digital over print publishing?
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, we're gonna have to see that what they start offering, right? Like, some people have said, well, maybe they're just talking about, like, hey, you love the Dragonlance game, here's your Dragonlance T-shirt we're offering you. Okay, that's completely auxiliary, impacts nothing. That's just an uptick in sales. I think we all feel good. Buying a T-shirt probably doesn't, hurt your ability to buy the next, the Planescape set when it comes out. But other things may, right? And we saw that, for example, with 4th edition, where DDI, digital, right, was the digital version of Dragon and Dungeon magazines. And they began to provide lots and lots of player content. And I recall how everybody was so excited to get, a whole new set of powers and a new set of feats and a new, race, ancestry, species. And then it became this glut where kind of every week your class was changing. Your character
Mhm.
was changing, and everybody started going, "Whoa, whoa!" And that glut lasted to the end of fourth edition and hurt
Mhm.
through to the end of fourth edition. It was a lasting negative impact of too much glut for players and DMs that just clogged up the works, right? So I have no idea what they're going to offer, but those are concerns and things to be careful of,
Yeah.
because it may seem like you're just going to have sales of, say, feats through the roof, but eventually be, oh no, that one's online, right? And
Right.
did you get last week's thing? No, I'm still working on the, set of player
Yeah.
options from the week before that. And
Yeah. Now, however,
Mhm.
if this digital initiative for post-sale revenue generation is in the form of we're going to give you the opportunity on our virtual tabletop to, you know, have green horns for your tiefling instead of red.
Green horns. Oh,
Right, I guess. Uh, if your green flame blade,
yeah. Green flame. There we go.
thank you, uh, can now be a red flame blade
Right.
for 99 cents. How many people are going to jump all
Yeah.
over that? That doesn't
Yeah.
affect game design. That doesn't affect the mechanics that
Right.
keep this game going. It avoids that glut when a game needs to, at its core, maintain its simplicity to keep people coming in. There you are now talking about not messing with the game,
Mhm.
gaining revenue, and appealing to what the current generation of gamers not only wants but expects from their hobby, from their
And
media.
I have a thought about this, that all of these things are worse when the number of players is low and better when the number of players are high. Meaning that if I have 20 people, to take an exaggeratedly small number, on the virtual tabletop that want to pay for purple hair, the way purple hair sales have to work are going to be problematic for everybody, because it has
Mhm,
to create enough revenue from those 20 people that it's just not going to be healthy, right? But
mhm,
if I have millions playing online, as games like, say, Fortnite have, then when you offer purple hair, it can be for a really cheap price and nobody cares. And
mhm,
the sales are big enough that everybody's winning, right?
mhm,
It
right,
feels like. And this links to the overall that, you can't stop thinking about the size of the audience. And
right.
they had an interesting quote here that if the Magic strategy, so Magic the card game, is a deep single quadrant strategy, the D&D strategy is a broad 4-quadrant strategy where we have this powerful brand that has similar awareness to Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. And what they're talking about here is a single quadrant brand is one that has a narrow, passionate audience, and that's a specific quadrant. There are these 4 quadrants that represent different types of interactions between your brand and customers. And here they're
Mhm,
talking about, narrow, passionate audience. And but then you take something like D&D, and I think it's Chris Cox that says that when he goes to a party and he talks about magic, a few people know what he's talking about. When he
mhm,
talks about D&D, almost everybody knows what he's talking about, right? Because it is in all these quadrants. It's in all 4 quadrants, and therefore can appeal to a wide number of people for very different reasons. So you can have
mhm,
the sort of Stranger Things appeal where you just want the t-shirt because you like the show, right? That can be, or Nike, right? How many people have a Nike something just because Nike's cool is the feeling you have, right? So you want to be in on it and you want to have that. And that's the kind of thing that can allow purple hair on the virtual tabletop to work really well and be non-intrusive, because you have this very large
mhm.
audience that's fueling that, right? So the one needs the other, I think.
Yeah. And when you talk about 4-quadrant brands, you're talking about the game itself, you're talking about the movies and visual entertainment, you're talking about uh, video games, and you're talking about toys and knickknacks and sort of minis and all of that stuff. So as opposed to Magic, D&D is definitely in a better position, as Teos just said, to capitalize on that
Yeah.
in every way that the word capital is defined, because it does have that broader appeal. And hopefully the D&D film will push it to the point where people do want to play, do want the video games and do want the toys and do want the knickknacks, but also want to play the game.
Yeah, right.
In
And the
a
game
perfect
remains what
world,
we love about it, right?
exactly. So we will see, and
And
that will affect game design.
and I'm glad to rob a few segments from or seconds from what we'll talk about later to talking about here because I think it's really interesting and critical. There have been many times in D&D's history where the brand could have, or the game could have fallen apart,
Mhm.
and destroyed what tabletop D&D gaming was, right?
Right.
One was where the company, the copyrights were owned legally for TSR by creditors, and
Right.
had they fallen under, those things may have been sold piecemeal, right, to where the
Mhm.
game was fragmented and not joined, and you couldn't write all of it. Um, there was the moment when the OGL was being created, and the original vision that was there, and really the kernel of what Ryan Dancey was pushing was, we don't need a D&D team writing the game anymore. We'll write 3 core books and third-party publishers will do the rest, and we'll barely own it. And we'll only make the t-shirts, right? And even with 5th edition, there was that sort of sentiment of maybe our sales really come from, t-shirts and mugs and things like that. And then the game proved it could be so good as to create all of the energy and excitement we've seen.
Right.
And oh, lo and behold, the game actually is an important property. So there are always these moments that and there have been
Right.
many in the history of the game where D&D was this close to somebody going like, yeah, stop making that
Mhm.
game or get rid of, focus on this.
Right.
And there will be more. There will be more
Mhm.
moments when the game is threatened like this, right?
Yeah. And there was such a sea change in what the game could be in terms of a revenue generator that now Wizards of the Coast is driving Hasbro as opposed to the other way around. Which, if you would ask me 20, 10, 5, 3 years ago, if that could ever happen, I would say not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And here we are seeing it happening.
Well, I used to, people used to say, well, Hasbro, blah, blah, blah. And I did look, Hasbro isn't doing anything with D&D. D&D operates on its own. And that was very true until just a couple of years ago.
Right.
It's changed dramatically, right? And some of that is because D&D finally got what it wanted to be a pillar brand. It was always pursuing it, never
Mhm.
getting it. And now it is. And so now it is. It's all inexorable, right? To say Hasbro is to say Wizards, to say D&D. They're all talking to one another, and they all have their fingers in their pies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whew.
Going from a 1 quadrant strategy to a 4 quadrant strategy, let's talk about Baldur's Gate 3, which now has a release date. Larian, the company that was, I believe, purchased by Wizards of the Coast
Oh, were they?
and has been
Oh,
working. I thought so, or maybe they.
could
I
be.
don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I thought they were more directly tied to Wizards now than when this started, but they and Wizards of the Coast announced that the game will be coming out in August of 2023. When did the first beta version come out? 2020. So this has been going on for a bit. A new trailer has dropped that shows Minsk and Boo being part of the action. And they've also announced pre-orders for a collector's edition with everything from cloth maps to a diorama to a tadpole keyring for the low price of $270.
I had a moment when I imagined myself telling my wife, "But I got this keychain," and holding this like illithid
Yeah.
tadpole that's supposed to go into your brain, and just her expression would be priceless. I did confirm, by the way, Larian Studios was purchased by Wizards of the Coast. Yep.
That's right. I'm getting old, but I remembered that from somewhere deep in the recesses of this gray
Well
matter.
done. Yeah, I mean, I love
Yep.
me a cloth map, not up to the tune of $270.
Yeah.
But I'm glad this game is finally out for everybody's sake, and I hope it's great. I will probably try it, because I did enjoy those kinds of games, and I have heard a lot of people saying that they enjoy,
Mhm.
overall what the experience is for those who have done the pre-release. So hopefully now that kind of the annoying bugs are gone, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was excited to play it in 2020. And now I am still, having grown up on Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, uh, the nostalgia is strong. And I just when it comes out, I will probably take a look at it and we'll see how it goes. We now have a manual of gainful exercise in real life. This was a book from AD&D that I
Hmm.
believe increased your constitution if you read it. And now it is a supplement on the DM's Guild by Steve Hoyne, I'm going to say. It provides actual workouts for you, and the workouts are organized according to your D&D subclasses. Teos, what else can you do with this
I saw
manual?
this and I thought this is the coolest idea ever. So you get to look up, what you decide your subclass is. Are you more of a wizard? Are you a paladin? And what subclass under those classes? And then you can, in some cases, roll on tables to customize your workout from the available options. And it's really fun to see the creative way that Steve has taken these subclasses and clearly knows a lot about working out to create real life exercises you can do to stay healthy. So I highly recommend it. It's $3.65, which on its own, great price, well worth it. If you do just a few push-ups a day, that would be well worth it. You'll be the fighter you were meant to be. But you can also get discount coupons directly on the DM's Guild page. Link is in our show notes, including like 90% off and really high levels. If you need to, or if that's the only level at which you'll purchase, Steve has some instructions there. But really cool. There are a number of levels of coupons that you can choose to bring the price down significantly. I think that's a really smart way to have done it. Steve was originally thinking pay what you want and change, and I think this is a smart approach. Also, I think you can see, if not the entire product, very close to it as a preview, so you know exactly what you're getting.
Mm-hmm. Another item on the DM's Guild to keep in mind is Tasselhoff's Pouches of Everything, coming to us from Dragonlance Nexus. So this product, which went up right after Dragonlance was released, has over 100 pages of content, which includes ancestry, subclasses, equipment, the pantheons of Kryn, a section on the ambient magic of Kryn, new magic weapons and items based on the setting and the books, the history of the setting throughout the ages, the geography, a map of the setting, and so much more. You also, if you purchase this, get Champions of Kryn, Chapter 1, which is a level 1 adventure. And so all of that is a pretty nice value for $16.95. I looked at this and I thought, and we were just talking about wizards making the core books and letting other people do the rest. This is something made by the Dragonlance Nexus, which are super fans of Dragonlance. I could see this being the release that Wizards did,
Right.
right? It's got all of
Yeah.
the things that the fans love about Dragonlance, all 5th editionified for you. And so if you are a Dragonlance fan, or even if you're just looking for an adventure, you can check it out on the DM's Guild.
Yeah. Really neat. I love what this product aims to provide. It's already a silver seller, and I'm sure it'll keep climbing.